in the chat. So why is it important to structure information? First is reception. So the way we structure information really affects how easy it is for our audience to grasp information with as little effort as possible. So that is the key word right there, to grasp information with as little effort as possible, because the people in the room might be like moving from one meeting to another, and they want to get the kind of a quick understanding of what you're trying to present. Next is clarity. So being intentional about the words that we use or the information we share can bring clarity on otherwise confusing topics. So if you look at, let's say, a phrase and you see, oh yeah, this is right, but actually maybe changing that specific phrase can change the whole meaning or like the whole point of your presentation. And maybe that changing that phrase will make things a little bit more, a little easier for your audience to understand what you're trying to say. And then the third piece is understanding. So the easier we make it for our stakeholders, the better it is for them to connect ideas in their minds and see the value of our suggestions. So maybe they have their own thoughts in their head, and though when we make it easier for them to understand what we're trying to say, they're able to kind of connect our ideas and their ideas, and then have a more productive discussion on during the meeting. And the last is impact. So when we understand our audience, we can tailor the information that is relevant to them and to the things they care about, making it more likely for ideas to be taken forward. So again, understanding the people who are in the room will help you identify the types of information that you can present in your presentation. So here is a quick overview of the guidelines that I'll be talking you through in the next couple slides. I will share each guideline, and then maybe some practical tips on how to apply it so that when you're like when you realize that, oh, I need to structure this information in a different way, then you can use these tips that I'm sharing in the next couple slides. But first things first. So every time you're making a deck or a presentation, it is important that you determine the purpose of this presentation or this meeting. Is this meeting going to be just an update meeting where we share what we've done in the past week or in the past day? Is this a meeting where people decide on the steps that we need to move forward? Or is this a meeting that is just about sharing what we've known so far? It can vary, but again, the important thing is that you determine or understand the purpose of that meeting or that presentation. And then the second piece is like figuring out who is going to be there. So when you know the people who's going to be in that meeting or that presentation, again, you can tailor the information that you're presenting, and you can identify the information that is relevant for them. Third is know how long the presentation or the meeting will be. So no brainer, like understanding how long a meeting will be will at least like help you cut the information that's not necessary and just focus on the core of what you want to say. So first guideline is determine the right amount of information to share. So understanding how a presentation will be used after a meeting will help you determine the right amount of information to share. So what do I mean? So like my colleagues right now at my job and even in my previous jobs, every time we make a deck or presentation, they would always ask at the beginning, so is this a takeaway document or a presentation that needs voiceover for context and storytelling? So when I say takeaway document, it's almost like a report, so typically written as a report that can be read and understood outside a meeting or without any voiceover. So let's say someone sees, let's say a PDF, someone sees this PDF, and this someone was not in the presentation that where you presented it, they can still understand what you're trying to say, or they can still understand the context, because all the content is there. So you will see that if it's a takeaway document, there's actually a lot of content. So a good example of this would be, this is just a screenshot that I took. So this is a screenshot from a slide by Blackwell Capital. It's a VC firm. And they had this presentation for public view, and this was a call for action presentation on Peloton, the exercise bike. So if you remember, I think early last year, there were news that the business of Peloton was going down, and that there are they need to find ways on how to make their business sustainable, or else they will go bankrupt. So this presentation was available for public, and you can see in here that there's a lot of content in there. And if you go through all the whole slide, um, you'll see that there's a lot of information, and I could, like, anyone could easily kind of like understand what the presentation is about just by reading through it without any voiceover. So the second piece is just a typical, I don't know how to call it, but I just call it presentation. But what do I mean by that? So this one is more highly visual with very little text, and is designed to support and complement a voiceover by a presenter. So a good example of this would be your TED Talk. So if you look at all the TED Talks, TED Talk videos, there is a speaker, and the slides that they have on the background are typically just images that support what they're trying to say, or like something, a slide with, like, let's say 5 words that is again in support of what they're trying to say. And the reason for that is that, again, like these TED Talks, the main focus is the storytelling of the speaker, not the slides that are in there. And if we think about these TED Talks, they are available, like the videos become available after, so it's not really necessary that the slides contain many content, or like content and information, because you will anyway hear the speaker talk, and you will anyway hear them do a voiceover of, again, the story that they're trying to tell. So knowing whether a document that you're making is a takeaway or presentation is really critical. This is an example of what I've made in the past. So you'll see here that it has a lot of text. And this was because in that project, we defined this, I think this was from just one presentation. We defined that presentation to be a report, like sort of a report that people wanted to see or pass around for people outside the meeting. And I think the important thing to understand also is that if you're using this type of format, that the content that you place in here, maybe if you're a student, if you're doing a midway presentation, this content can also be used towards the report that you're making at the end of the project. And again, like, because this has a lot of content, what we found helpful when we have these types of presentations is that we send a pre-read, or like a PDF, let's say 2 days, 3 days in advance, to the meeting participants, so that they can skim through the content before the actual presentation. All right, second guideline. So segregating information. So a question to ask yourself when you're bombarded with, let's say, information from research that you've done, or like an interview that you've done, is that, is this a today information, or is this a next week, next month, or a next phase information? So when we think about, let's say, again, a design process or like a project, typically there are multiple phases in terms of like navigating through the process, right? So there is that, let's say, kickoff, or like the research part, and then maybe there's that ideation part, or that prototyping, and then the testing, and all these sorts of things. So there's always a phase in terms of having in a project. So understanding first that who is going to be in that meeting, again, going back to the core that we were talking about earlier, what is the goal of this meeting, and the types of decisions that would be made during this meeting will help you understand the type of information that you share in your presentation. Some of the questions I also ask myself when I'm bombarded with like a lot of information is like answering these questions. So if your answer to these questions is a yes, then it means that you should share that information. It's just only a matter of time when you should share it. So again, if an information is needed to meet the goal of the project, if it aligns to the goal of the meeting, then of course it should go in the presentation. If it's needed to make a decision, or if it's been shared before, or if it's new, if it's important for a background knowledge or context, or if it's new to other stakeholders in the meeting, or if it's an update. So again, figuring out how this information will be helpful to the participants in the room is crucial in terms of adding them in the presentation. Next, so organizing information based on flow of thought and impact. So we can actually help our audience ease their way into understanding the information that we're sharing. So based on flow of thought. So this is like a guideline I follow a lot. Pieces of information that are similar or closely related to each other should be positioned closely together. So, in presentations, we don't typically write paragraphs, right? Like we write bullet points, we write little blocks of text. And oftentimes, when we do that, like putting blocks of text that are related to each other is really helpful so that people can understand, oh, this is talking about, let's say, specific topic. Oh, this cluster is talking about a specific topic. So think about your affinity mapping, right? Or like having all these similarly related topics together. So an example of this, I mean, you will have access to this presentation after, but an example of that I've highlighted here is, let's say, sample list of reasons that make people happy at work. And it's not a ranking, it's just a list. So on the left side, you'll see different types of reasons that make people happy at work. It's kind of like all over the place. But when I rearranged it, the way on the right side is that the first part, the first cluster, is really about tangible benefits like your high salary or like good perks or flexible remote work. And then a cluster around positive company related atmosphere. So, company culture, supportive boss, healthy work life balance. And then the last is about intrinsic motivation, like focus on the individual, so challenging work, opportunity to make an impact. So clustering these things will help your audience process them in, or like make buckets or categories in their heads as well. The other piece that I also use is based on uniqueness and impact. So, expected or common information, or kind of like common sense information, are placed at the beginning, and unique information are at the end. So, I do this because I want to kind of help the audience ease their way into understanding the information, and that at the end, the topics that are typically at the end are the ones that are, I don't want to say groundbreaking, but kind of close to that. Or those are maybe the topics that may elicit a lot of questions or clarification. So we want to leave that towards the end so that we have more time to talk about it. So an example here, and I won't go through the whole thing, but like an example here, let's say, is that at the beginning, let's say services in the library are fragmented. So this is just about assessing the current state of the services in the library. It's fragmented. That was a very straightforward. But if you look at the topic, which is at the rightmost part, so opportunity to create a research hub dedicated to data science. So that topic itself is a much larger endeavor than just services in the library. So thinking about very micro topic and going to like a macro view of a takeaway or like an insight is really helpful so that people can see how your thinking is progressing as you're trying to get more insights from a project. Next, think and distill information in multiple levels. So think we can actually segment information on multiple levels. So oftentimes, and this has happened to me in the past with my colleagues, we would be talking about a specific topic, and let's say it's four of us, and we would talk about the topic from very different angles. We knew we were all making the same point, but for some reason, we were just not connecting. And we couldn't figure out why. And then we realized that everyone was actually talking about the same point, but we were talking about it from different levels. So one was talking about it from a very detailed perspective, and the other one was just talking about it from like a very high level general perspective. And that's when I realized that, oh yeah, like we can be talking about the same thing, but in like we're actually coming from different levels. So this one talks about like the hierarchy principle from Richard Saul Wurmans. He has like a latch principle about categorizing information. And the reason this is helpful is that it really showcases how you have expansive thinking and a taxonomical structure of thought. So how does this apply? So again, this is an example from a project that I did at Bright Spot. So we were researching services that would go in the library, specifically focused on digital scholarship. So how we had a lot of information and how we kind of boiled down to like showcasing the important principles was that identifying these principles. So we had availability, visibility, discoverability. And then, so that's like your list of principles. And then for each principle, we made definition and tactical steps. So an example here, so availability, and then we had a definition that making sure that tools and technologies are easily obtainable and within reach. But what does that exactly mean? So we had different steps in terms, or we had different bullets in terms of to further define it. So maybe it meant accessing tools in person or remotely, anytime from anywhere, or maybe having enough subject experts to support student projects. So again, going into the detail was really helpful so that we're not kind of missing any concept or idea that we want to include in the process. Okay, hope you're still with me. Next is ensuring parallelism and consistency. So this is kind of very straightforward. This is just about structuring words and phrases the same way by using the same grammatical pattern. What do I mean by that? So these are like some examples. So if you see the fair data principles, this is I think this is a world-renowned kind of principle in terms of like managing data. You'll see that they've phrased the principles like this: so findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. So it is a verb, let's say find, with the word with the suffix able, and phrasing it that way is easier because it's consistent throughout the whole principle. And then this one on the right here, you've probably seen this before. So this is your sweet spot of innovation, your desirability, feasibility, viability. Again, they're all phrased the same way as an adjective with a ity suffix at the end. And on the left side here with like the images, these are like some of the trend slides I've made for a School of Medicine project. So you'll see here that I've phrased them with started the phrase with a verb. So let's say develop empathetic and humanistic professionals, or build industry partnerships and opportunities. So starting it all the same way, again, makes that kind of process very consistent as audience is looking through the report or the presentation. Finding the right language. We should be intentional with the language we use, as being sloppy can hinder us from communicating the point that we want to make. So sometimes, even if words seem similar, they can evoke different meanings. Um, for example, right, if you anyone of you has seen this emotion wheel, I mean, even in psychology, it's also being applied, right? So, like sometimes just saying we are sad does not fully capture what we're trying to, what we're feeling. So they've broken it down into different dimensions of sadness. Maybe it's about being lonely or being lost or being disappointed or something else. But being very specific about the words we use kind of helps us capture what we're trying to say. I had a colleague who told me that, oh, like making presentations, the thesaurus is our best friend. And I didn't realize how like important that is until, I mean, I was already using it, but I'm like, yeah, actually, yeah, that's true. It's like part of the way I work, because sometimes I would craft a sentence and I read it and it doesn't sit quite right with me. So I would go on thesaurus and find different synonyms for a specific word, and I would try each one out, and then I realized, oh, okay, this one is perfect. This one fits it better. So I think that's a tip that would be helpful for anyone if you're making a presentation. And this is just an example of I guess, my most used words when I'm creating presentations. Again, you'll see here that's even just the word understand. There are many ways on how to say or how to communicate understanding or how to connect. There are again many words on how to say that. And the key here is wordsmithing or reading that statement over and over again, so that you can find the word that really fits what you're trying to say. Another component of this would be using softer or stronger words. So some words tend to hold a certain weight and impact on them. And this is typically associated with words of like that relate to feelings or learning levels. So some example here. So you'll see in this, let's say in the green arrow, that this is increasing intensity in terms of happiness. So maybe you'll start off with a grin, and then the more intense one is like roaring with laughter. So you'll see that each word can can signify different intensity. And again, like the way you use your words can, so if you use a word that has a specific intensity, of course that also kind of evokes the same feeling or the same understanding for the people that you are talking to. And last sub point for this one is providing language when needed. So setting a language and definition may be needed to create a shared understanding. So these are the examples here. Are actually, some of the, I guess, yeah, these are like good examples that I've encountered in the past. So when I was working on this like digital scholarship library project, we had a bunch of interviews. Let's say I think like 12, 15 interviews. And of course, each of these interviews, we have the same questions for them. But all of them were talking about different things. They were talking about, I mean, everyone had different perceptions on what digital scholarship means. And so I started bucketing the information I was getting into what was like the topics that are like closely together, and I realized that it didn't make sense to just put these like findings or insights into bullet points. It was easier for me to like frame them as roles or kind of like a person, so that the person or when we're presenting it back, they can kind of visualize it or have an image in their heads of what I'm trying to say. So here are like the example. So oh, maybe it's like a mediator or a bridge. And then what does it mean to be a bridge? Oh, it bridges physical and digital, and then had a definition in here of what we're trying to say. So that's like one example. And then the other one here, it's this one is more about like industry collaboration, basically how universities partner with an industry partner. So how this went was that we were talking to a client and we were asking him, so how do you imagine this building collaborating with industry professionals or like companies or like private companies? And he was like, oh, yeah, we were thinking, yeah, maybe they can share some space in the building, or maybe they can host some workshops in the building, or I don't know, maybe there's like free or like tuition, what was that, like tuition support. So he was sharing all these things, but he was sharing it in a kind of like in passing manner. Like he was thinking about these things as we were talking. But because he was thinking about it in that way, it meant for us, it meant that he hasn't really thought about it that much yet. And so we took that as an opportunity to kind of put language to it, to what he was saying. So we're like, okay, he mentioned something around tuition, so maybe that's one model. He mentioned something about sharing workspace, so that's one model. And then we did a bunch of other research on what other ways can a university collaborate with an industry partner. And we presented that slide back to him and said, okay, actually from taking the information that you shared with us before, we've actually made these models of what you shared, and we're curious to hear if you were thinking about other models as well. He was like, oh, this is such a nice way to kind of, it's like putting a language to his thought, or like putting down a words to the things that he was just thinking about. And so that helped him to kind of pinpoint, oh, this one we want, this one we don't. And that helped him to kind of clarify to us and to his stakeholders as well what he wanted to what his vision was for the building that we were trying to build. And this is the last one. So, determining the valence of words and phrases. So, phrasing words and sentences positively or negatively can make a difference in your presentation. So, expressing ideas in a positive or negative manner can impact how a message will be received. So, here is an example of like how negative, like positive language. So, let's go to maybe the fourth example. The report won't be done in a week. That's like a negative language because there is a won't, like would not be done in a week. And then the positive one, to rephrase it, is that the report will be ready next week. The other example is that we cannot do what you requested. Positive language is an option that you have is. So what you notice here is that negative language tends to be imprecise and may sound like a dead end for discussion. So when the person says, oh, it won't be done in a week, it kind of like ends the conversation right there. But if we phrase it as a positive language, it tends to be more concrete and actionable, and it leaves room for opportunity or improvement. So when someone says, "Oh, it will be ready next week," then the person hearing that understands that, okay, it's going to be ready next week, or, oh, okay, cool, there's like an option that we have right there. So again, having I would gear, or I would move towards phrasing things in a positive language, because it again helps. Like, negative language tends to be a bit heavier when it's communicated in the presentation, or also in just like through verbal. So phrasing things in a positive language again creates that kind of opportunity to discuss it further, or like to make things more concrete and actionable. And I guess as a kind of closing thought before we move on to maybe some Q&A, or if you want to dive deep into a specific guideline, is that think of your presentation from a user experience perspective. So if most of the people in this room are coming from a UX design background, or generally a design background, so you want to think about you want to think of your presentation from the perspective of your user, which is, let's say, your audience, or the people who are hearing it. We want to make that, if it's a presentation, we want to make it as easy as possible for them to understand what you're trying to say, and to come out of the presentation feeling relieved, or like having positive feelings that, oh, that was an easy meeting. I understood clearly what we just talked about, because from at the beginning, when we were just creating the presentation, we were already thinking about how they will take away that, or how they will exit that presentation, because we were very intentional about the language we use and the information that we shared. And yeah, that is about it. Any questions? Mhm. 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 Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, like this is I think it's I also realized that this kind of, these guidelines or principles, like even when I was in school, when I was in college and also doing my master's, these were things that weren't really communicated to us. Like there was no, even if you had, like, let's say, public speaking class or like a presentation class, they only talk about how to present yourself, or like how to build a story, or like how to keep people engaged and all these things. But there wasn't really any kind of guideline, or like how do you call this, like uh lesson, I would say, in terms of how to like frame information in a certain way, or how to like be intentional about the information we're sharing. And even so, I was thinking about it, that I learned this when I was at Bright Spot in my old job, and then when I joined my new company now, it was interesting because I saw it as I realized that they also thought about these things in the same way, that, oh, we have to be intentional. I think there was one, I remember, like just this last week. So we were making a presentation, and one of the director I was working with was that, okay, like this, we shouldn't say, let's say, we shouldn't say this, what did he say? Oh, it was like for a life science project. So he was like, oh, we should phrase life science as XYZ, because the person who's going to be reading this sees life science that way. So again, thinking about the person who's seeing a presentation and how you're framing things in a presentation when they see that, oh, that's actually how I would say it. So they're more responsive to it because it makes them feel like you understood them, and it makes them feel heard and valued. So I think it's yeah, I hope this is helpful for everyone, and I'm happy to chat if you had any questions, or maybe when you come across a certain situation where you're not sure how to like frame things. I think Louisa and Melanie has my email. You can like feel free to reach out to me if you have any other thoughts or like questions even after this session. Mhm. 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 Yeah, yeah, of course. Sure, that would be great. And here is the so I think I mentioned earlier that there was when I was coming to this realization, I wrote them all down into an article, and this is the article that I wrote. I've this was in I hope it wait has been warned. What does it mean? I posted a link. Did everyone see a link, or I think I received? Oh, no problem. Okay, perfect. Perfect. Thank you. So, yeah, if you have those like that article has more kind of I would say visuals, but yeah, like feel free to connect with me if there's anything that comes to your mind. Again, also happy to share. I mean, this all the content that is in here are mostly in the article. So, if you like realize something after let's say 2 days from now or 3 days from now, happy to help you out or like yeah, talk to you about it. So, yeah.
Much. I guess if that's it, if there's no more questions, we could wrap it up. Thank you so much again for doing this talk. Sorry for being late, but if for those of you that are wondering if this session was recorded, I started recording maybe probably 10 minutes after you started. So I will still submit the recording just so that we can watch the rest of the presentation. And I believe you have some slides, right? Can we share
Yeah.
the slide deck with
Oh yeah,
our
yeah, sure.
members? Yeah.
Mhm.
We could also
All
share
right.
the slide deck with you as well, just so that you can catch up.
All right.
All right.
That's great.
Thanks so much,
All right.
guys. And
Thanks.
yeah, have a great weekend. And thanks for being here.
All right. Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoy your weekend. Bye.
You too. Bye bye.
Bye. Take care.